infinite complexity. Very technical crap, right? That I'm still, after years, wrapping my brain around. That Zizek seems to get. Right? There's all these unconscious motivators, drivers that are pushing me in directions, right? You think about the example that I gave in my semiotics lecture with respect to the notion of the oneric rebus, right? There is a sense in which my world becomes symbolic, right? My world becomes symbolized by meaning, right? Hopefully you know what that means, right? But insofar as it becomes symbolic by meaning, I conflate that for what's real. And this is exactly, maybe not in those technical terms, but I'm positive of this, right? And Zizek, if you ever watch my videos, first of all, you're a rock star. Second of all, I don't know that if you've done Nietzsche, but you really need to jump on it, man. You really need to jump on it, right? It's like, I would love to see Nietzsche via Zizek. I would love to see Zizek, do this, because he's the best at this stuff, right? But there is this, Nietzsche says it, it's undeniable. It's undeniable, right? All perfect acts are unconscious. He says that. All perfect acts are unconscious. Why? I take that via Zizek and Lacan, and I'm not a Lacanian scholar at all, but, I have an idea of how this works, a very good idea of how this works. All perfect acts are unconscious, meaning that in my unconscious state, I recognize what really is the case. I recognize the real. But in my conscious states, I can't recognize the real. My interaction day to day for the vast majority of my life, of my time, is spent in a symbolic relationship, right? We talk symbolically, we act symbolically, our gesticulations, everything that we do are informed by meaning, but behind that is the real. So insofar as I'm conscious, I'm aware of my consciousness, my existence as being, then my existence as being is informed by my interpretation of meaning via symbols. But insofar, and I think I'm right now, insofar, and I'm a little, like I said, this is not my strongest point, but I think I'm right? Usually I can tell you factually this is what Nietzsche's saying, but this particular piece is super dense. I think what he's saying, via Zizek and Lacan, is insofar as I make conscious decisions, I lose perfectibility because those conscious decisions are really gestures they're symbolic gestures. It's only when I won't even go so far as decisions, it's only when I am no longer conscious of the subject that I can perfectly express really the will, in a sense. So I'll stop there because I'm not even sure that that's fully right. There's tons of Nietzsche that I know rock solid. I'm not perfect, and Nietzsche's really dense. So for those of you who have more sort of psychoanalytic training, chime in on what you feel about Nietzsche incorporating in note 289, sort of both the idea of perfectibility, of consciousness, and of the, I think he says the subject, the state of the person, right? He has everything that you need there to evoke sort of this symbolic, real discourse, right? Everything's there. The only example that I can think of, and this is me now freestyling, usually I'm solid, but I'm a little weak at this part. The only thing that I can think of at this point is the zone for athletes, right? Athletes are in the zone. When Michael Jordan is at the top of his game, he's fluid, in a sense. He really steps into the real, I guess. He no longer recognizes, and I could be off, so I apologize if I'm off. But from my understanding, it's that I recognize, if I recognize that I'm in the game of basketball, then insofar as I recognize that I'm in the game of basketball, I'm stuck in a misrepresentation. Because it really isn't the game of basketball that's being played when you're playing basketball. That's not what's happening. Basketball and this is actually, you know what this is? This is Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein's discourse on game. Not like game theoretics properly, but the idea of game. Really what's happening yeah, actually I think I'm right. Really what's happening in basketball when Jordan is in the zone is not that he's playing for the Chicago Bulls, or this is the game of basketball, or that, you know, this is the ball, or that's my objective. It's that this is a game of competition. And the way it is sort of really, the way to win is to score points, and he's just fluid. He's in that state. Not aware of his surroundings per se. He's just, this feels like a good spot. But he's not thinking about it. He doesn't go here. He's not rationally deliberating. He just does it. And wow, shot after shot after shot. Right? Athletes have been in the zone. And I would love to see more discourse from, like, what do you call the people who do this? Physical therapists, or sports therapists, sports people. I forget the name, I'm just blank today. But it would be interesting to see sort of a philosophical, psychological, and I know people have written about the zone, but like that mentality of being in the zone. I don't know what I was doing. I didn't hear the crowd. I used to run track competitively, high school, and NCAA Division I. Wow, Jason, I couldn't believe you did what you did. I didn't even hear anything. I didn't hear the crowd. I didn't think of anything. I wasn't there. Right? You know, somebody's ahead of me. I need to beat them. And I'm going as fast as I can to try and drive it. And if I'm ahead on some Michael Johnson, right? If I'm ahead, then I'm not running against anybody else. It's just me and the clock. It's like the scene in the Animatrix. Oh, that's exactly the point. It's like the scene in the Animatrix, the cartoon version. Well, obviously the Animatrix. That's it. In competition, the guy's running. He's running so hard he jumps out of his skin. He sort of transitions from the symbolic into the real. In a sense, right? He comes outside of himself in the act of running, but they show it sort of realistically, like him removing himself from his flesh, right? That's what's at stake here, and I think you know, for me, if I got that right, and I feel like I got it right, then that's what freedom's all about. That's what it is. It's about letting that thing that I can't quite cognitively access, but really defines me, let that beast out. Let Jason Campbell really do what he want to do. Right? All the suit and tie. And if I were really to do it, I'd start doing my lectures in a beater. So I could really mess you up. I'd be looking stupid, but yeah, maybe it's that. I don't know. Anyway. I could have been off on that, but that passage for me is a passage that's, I know it's important. I know it's super difficult. I mean, it's super important, but it's hard, even for me. And I'm good at this. It's a hard passage for me to make sense of, and I don't know that what I just told you is actually right. So, with respect to note 289, I think it's a good grain of salt, but unlike everything else that I would say I'm pretty comfortable in, take that as a grain of salt. I'm still trying to make sense of all of that Zizhakian, Lacanian stuff, because those guys are uber smart. It's a lot to try and make sense of the relationships and blah blah blah. But everything's there that you need to have that discussion. Consciousness, unconscious action, identification of the individual, loss of the individual, perfectibility. I mean, it's all there. Okay. All right. So the next is, the question becomes, since one does not know the origins and one does not know the consequences, does an action done possess any value at all? Right? Does action possess a value at all? Right? If we're talking about actions in the world, is it fair to say that there's value in the act in and of itself? Now, from a religious standpoint, and you should recognize with respect to moral phenomena, and now I'm back to stuff I really know. With respect to moral phenomena and moral valuation, the argument is that the action in and of itself is infused with morality, which Nietzsche categorically denies. Right? So remember this quote, my chief proposition, and this is exactly what I just said, quote, my chief proposition, there are no moral phenomena. There's only a moral interpretation of these phenomena. I've discussed this at length. This interpretation itself is of extra moral origin. I discussed that. And that's note 258. Now, let's combine that 258 with 292. So you can see what I'm doing, right? The restoration of nature and act, quote, the restoration of nature and act in itself is perfectly devoid of value. Nietzsche says, if we are to restore nature, we have to recognize that the act within a naturalistic using Nietzsche's conception of the natural.